Stop for a second. Look around you. The job you're heading to, the rent you're paying, the boss who can fire you. The fact that some people own private jets while others sleep on pavements. Most of us accept this as just how things are. You've been told a story about why the world looks like this. The first version claims that once humans were free and equal. Then we invented agriculture, settled down, and accumulated property. From that property came kings, prisons, and billionaires. In this story, civilization is a fall from grace that we can never undo. The second story is the opposite. It says early humans were brutal and lived in a state of constant war. Civilization was our rescue. Hierarchies and laws arrived to tame us, and while they limit our freedom, they are the only things keeping us from chaos. Both stories trap you in the same conclusion. Whether civilization was a fall or a rescue, we're stuck with it. The office, the government, and the economy are presented as the inevitable price of being modern. There is no real alternative. But 300 years ago, European thinkers were confronted by a man who challenged this entire logic. Kandiaronk was a Wendat statesman in North America who became famous for his ability to dismantle European civilization piece by piece. He sat in rooms like this and asked French governors and missionaries why they tolerated rich and poor people, why they gave up their freedom to a king, why they needed laws written on paper when his people lived perfectly well without them. These critiques were written down and became bestsellers in Europe. Voltaire and Rousseau read them. The ideas we now call Western, liberty, equality, and the critique of authority, were significantly shaped by indigenous thinkers who looked at Europe and saw a society of slaves. This created a crisis. If indigenous societies were actually more free than European ones, it suggested European hierarchy was a failure. To resolve the contradiction, elites popularized the stages of civilization. They reclassified indigenous critics as primitive, stuck at an earlier stage of development, suggesting their ideas weren't political philosophy, but the babbling of children who hadn't grown up yet. This linear history became the backbone of everything you learned in school. It wasn't an objective discovery, it was a defensive shield. It allowed Europe to acknowledge the idea of freedom while insisting it was impossible for a complex society to actually achieve it. We still live inside that defensive shield today. We assume that once a society reaches a certain size, the physics of logistics makes hierarchy, bosses, and inequality mandatory. Archaeologists in Ukraine have discovered massive cities that contradict this assumption. These sites housed over 10,000 people, yet they contain no palaces, no central temples, and no royal tombs. The houses are roughly the same size and arranged in concentric circles, built for a society governed by assembly rather than a ruling class. At Çatalhöyük in Turkey, 8,000 people lived together for over 1,000 years with no evidence of social ranks or centralized authority. The excavation shows a world where people managed a dense urban environment without a single boss. Even in the massive city of Teotihuacan, the architecture shows a society that actively rejected hierarchy. At one point, residents stopped building palaces and constructed high-quality, standardized housing for the entire population. The pyramids remained, but the kings apparently did not. The historical record suggests that hierarchy is not a requirement of scale. It is a configuration. When humans cluster in big numbers, the move toward inequality is a choice, not a law of nature. Humans used to be much more flexible in making that choice. Many ancient societies, like the Nuer or the Inuit, were seasonal. They might spend half the year in a strict hierarchy with ritual leaders, and the other half scattered into small groups with no chiefs at all. This cyclical pattern shows that our ancestors could consciously build and dismantle political systems, like changing clothes. They had the cognitive flexibility to experiment with how they lived together, depending on the time of year. This shifts the core inquiry. Instead of asking how inequality started, we have to look at how we became stuck. How did we end up in a world where almost everyone, everywhere, lives inside the same rigid system of wage labor and nation-states? We have lost 3 primordial freedoms that humans used to take for granted: the freedom to walk away and join a different group, the freedom to disobey arbitrary commands, and the freedom to entirely reorganize how society works. Look at your own life and ask honestly, which of these do you actually have? You are free to move inside the system, but you are no longer free to live under a different one. This is not a romantic suggestion that we should abandon modern life to live in the woods. The conditions that allowed for those ancient seasonal societies are gone, and we have built a world that is far more interconnected. It is, however, a challenge to the low hum of resignation we feel. That sense that our current world is the only possible version of progress is the legacy of the stages of civilization story. It makes our specific arrangement of work and property feel like physics rather than a choice. When you look at your team, household, or industry, ask yourself, what assumptions am I treating as fixed laws that are just habits? Other arrangements have worked for thousands of years. Configurations can change. For most of our history as a species, the basic question of existence was, what kind of social world should we build together this year? That was a question answered by ordinary people, not just politicians or CEOs. Somewhere along the way, that question was taken out of your hands and replaced with smaller ones about consumption and career. We come from a species that used to imagine bigger,